Welcome to the Progtalks by the Prog Space. Welcome to the Progtalks, an interview series by the Prog Space where we will be talking to musicians in all corners of the progressive music scene. Welcome back to the Progtalks after our little summer break. I'm still Uncle Prog, and today I have a couple of Canadian musicians with me. It's Raphael and Nathanael from Musk Ox, but also, of course, known from Nightwatch, working with Arbres, Raphael's solo work. It's good to have you on, guys. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, doing well.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm doing well.
Yeah, I want to congratulate you on the release of the album, the new Musk Ox album, Inheritance. It's been out since July 9th, right? I see you've gotten a few, reviews and fans are reacting to it. Are you happy with the feedback you've been getting, Nathanael?
Yeah, definitely. I think, we were very confident. We knew that we worked really hard on the album, and we were happy with it, but, people really, really loved Woodfall. So, and this is a little bit different. So we weren't really sure, but from the first single to releasing it, the reactions have been really, really positive from the reviews and from the fans. So it's kind of it's a big relief. I have my analogy is like when you're an artist, you build the house, but you can't live inside it. Like the fans go and they live inside it. Like I can tell you how long it took me to paint this wall or, all the wiring and everything, but really it's the fans that go in and they can tell you what it actually sounds like. So it's been a great experience to finally hear some feedback.
Yeah, I mean, it could be worse, right? I think definitely we're lucky that people are so into it. I kind of felt like by the time we had finished it, I was no longer really that interested in the music at all. So it's like it kind of gives me the second wave, like, oh yeah, okay, it's nice to know that people are digging, and I mean, my perspective is kind of that, like, yeah, you should just feel fortunate if people care about your music because no one owes you anything. And, you make it for yourself in the beginning, but then you also have to be able to communicate those ideas to people and, them receiving it well and having it be something important to them is extremely meaningful. So it's really nice.
Yeah, I sort of hear that from a lot of, or I've heard that from several musicians, the fact that, by the time the album is out, you're sort of, if not tired of the music, at least you've been living with it for so long that it seems like something, it's new to everyone else, but it's like old news to you. Is that something you guys, not struggle with, but feel when the album is finally out? Woodfall was out in 2014, so I don't know how long you guys have been working on this new material.
I mean, we've been working kind of sporadically throughout that time. We didn't really get started on this until a few years later, but then we spent several years on it. I mean, if you think about the time that we spent recording, so we started tracking in late 2019, and then basically the latter part of that year we recorded. And then, we did some sort of editing and some sort of housekeeping in the early part of 2020. And then like 4 months, sort of like a 4-month trajectory of mixing, and then, mastering in the fall, and then just sort of getting some stuff prepared in the meantime. But then that's obviously a several month period before the actual record came out. And then, of course, that's not including all the time that we spent writing the music. So it's kind of it's a long period of incubation and also just sort of sitting with the music, and when you finish a record, you often feel like, okay, this music is dead now. It's dead to me. It's like, okay, I'm just going to put this on the shelf. It's like, okay, yeah. I just want to make the next one now. Like it's relevant for you as long as you're working on it. And then when you finally decide you can give yourself permission to stop working on it, then it's like it's no longer really yours to engage with. It becomes, hopefully, you put it out in the world, and then it has its own life. So
yeah, and one thing about sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I just want to say that must be a challenge then when you are finished with something, and then there's still quite a wait until you sort of wrapped up, but there's still quite a wait until the fans can actually engage with it.
Yeah, I think what's important is to try to dig into what it means to you, and on a more conceptual level and on a more universal level that people can relate to, and to be able to find a way to express that to them. Because otherwise you're still in your head about all the details. Like you're thinking, oh yeah, this thing was like 3 dB too loud, or like, we shouldn't have done that type of automation curve on this part, or, oh yeah, we really should have used that other take here. Or, I think that like, whatever it is, right? It's like these.
It gives you time details to doubt yourself.
Yeah, like no one really cares about that in the end. It's like there's a lot of things that I've made where I just felt like, oh man, like I can't believe we let that slip by. And then a lot of people like the record. And I'm like, how can you like that? You know what I mean? But then you have to kind of step back and think more about what does it mean to you, and to get to understand the music more from that conceptual level, and to be able to talk about it in words. I always find that that's like another stage altogether that reveals itself often only when the album is done.
Yeah. Do you find that, Nathanael, that it's sometimes hard to expect what fans will like, or how they will approach the music?
Yeah, definitely. I think for everyone, I think for anyone making music or making art, right? Even like a song like Memoriam, which was our first single, for that to be the first Musk Ox song that people hear after Woodfall, that's one of our, I think, more straightforward songs. And so I thought people would like it, but I didn't. But then a lot of people are like, oh, that was my favorite song. And I think, okay, cool. Like, again, it's like, as an artist, my review of Inheritance is, it sounds kind of like Woodfall. I think the songs are better composed and the production is better. That's a very basic, right? But then you have fans saying like, oh, Woodfall sounds like a forest, but Inheritance is like all the trees are bare and there's no leaves. I'm like, oh, like I like hearing those kinds of things because it shows, it gives another perspective. But one thing about the process, it can take a long time, but the process does become new as you're going along, right? So at first you have nothing, and then you have rough tracks, and you're like, oh, okay, I have a rough track, and then now I have a rough track with the cello, and then the violin, and then now we have the first mix. So it's kind of like revealing itself slowly. And I find that those moments are exciting because it's slowly showing itself. And then, then you have the master, and then you have the artwork. And so it's kind of like this, it's sort of like a puzzle, and it's kind of like revealing it. It's like you're trying to put the pieces together, but you don't know what the picture is. And then as you're going, the picture starts to reveal itself. And so that, I think, helps the process of actually not getting so bored with it, because you are starting to, it hopefully gets a little bit better each time. But yeah, I think anybody making art, at the end, for, when you listen to it, it's like a Frankenstein, right? You see, it's like I was talking about the house analogy. It's like when you look at a house, like, oh, it's beautiful. But like the carpenter would say like, oh, I had to fill that hole over there, or like the wires were all messed up over here, but you don't see that, so it takes a while to like hear it as music, because for so long you're looking at it with a magnifying glass and you're trying to find anything that could need changing. And so it takes a while to like put the magnifying glass down and just
sit back and zoom out.
Yeah, I think that different people relate to that in varying degrees. Like both of us are pretty hardcore on that stuff, and like we're really detail oriented. And I think you have to be to make a record like this one, because it's so dense and there's so much stuff happening, and it has to be played in a certain way, and it has to feel a certain way, and that way that it needs to come across has to represent everything that's going on, sort of in very high fidelity, you might say. It's like you want to be able to capture that picture and get all the details of it to come through. So that does take time. I think a lot of other people have very different approach, where they're a lot more hands off about it. But definitely the point at which you're able to listen to an entire mix like of the full record, and maybe not just an individual song, and you're sort of just dealing with fragments, but you can listen to the whole record and you have like at least a first mix. That's sort of a feeling of, okay, now we're dealing with an entire record. I really feel that with this album, it was that way, where each song required so much of its own individual attention, kind of like these 5 children, you know what I mean? They all had their own specific needs. And like, once we were able to deal with the bulk of it and listen to the full record, in one sequence, then we could understand it as a record and not just, kind of dealing with all the parts and, oh yeah, this song is feeling this way right now, or I feel like this song is a bit further along. But I think that what's nice is that it seems that in general, the whole feels quite consistent. I don't like with Woodfall, I feel like certain tracks were realized much better than others. And with this album, I just feel like all the tracks were equally well realized. And so it doesn't feel like, oh yeah, there's clearly a weak link here. This song, it was a misfire, or just the sounds weren't as good, or the mix wasn't as good. It feels consistent. It better be. We spent so much time on it, but I think, that's the nice thing about it for sure.
Well, it's also it's also a bit shorter too. So it's a bit shorter. So, it's almost 20 minutes shorter than Woodfall. So that, like, if we had another 20-minute song, the attention to each song goes down because you're spreading it out. So with this album, we wanted it to be a bit more, so we could kind of condense it and sort of get the focus just right on each piece.
That does really sort of almost like answers one of the questions I had, because I wrote down here that, Woodfall was quite a long album, with none of the tracks really being under this one track or something slightly under 10 minutes, and everything else is like you have 2 like 17-minute tracks on there, ending up at much more than 1 hour in the end. And this new album also has a few shorter tracks, and like you said, it feels a bit more focused, while Woodfall seemed maybe more exploratory to me. Was that something you had in mind when you started out making the album, or did it sort of happen organically through the process? And also, how did the writing and recording process for this new album differ from Woodfall, would you say?
Mm-hmm.
It's a few different questions. The first
so
part,
do you want to take one of them? I'll take one of them. I don't remember what the first one is.
The first one was about the form and the length.
I can talk about that if you want to talk about the composing.
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah. So definitely, like, when we finished Woodfall, I think me and Raph, I think we've pretty much been on the same page. I think we've all been on the same page from the beginning. Like, I think Woodfall was, again, Woodfall was a 65-minute song pretty much. Like, obviously there were movements, but everything had to flow together. So, which was a great challenge. But also, I think with this album, it was definitely intentional that we wanted to, kind of just tighten it up a little bit and really have it be kind of one focused experience. And I've talked about this in some other capacity, but I was really influenced by. I was thinking a lot about the classic Prog albums, like Close to the Edge and Relayer, where it's like you get kind of, it's sort of like a meal. You get like 3 servings. You get the big epic, and then you get, like Close to the Edge. It's like you get Close to the Edge, and that's just like a big meal. And then you get, And You and I, which is, that's it calms things down. And then you have Sabir Katru, which is like the party song, right? And so the kind of groovy song. And I was thinking a lot about that and as we were going, because I like that format, because each song kind of gives you something different. And I think with this album, that was kind of the intention. And it's like the beginning song kind of opens up. It's the opening scene of the movie, right? Then you have the big epic. And then Memoriam is a little bit more subdued, even though that song was supposed to be kind of like a ballad, but it ended up being a lot more intense, which was interesting.
But actually, I was going to say it could have been a lot more intense, because we rewrote the outro. It was going to be a longer song with this a really proggy outro that was like a real kind of departure from the rest. And then we ended up kind of having a soft landing at the end. That song actually ended up being more condensed. But then Weightless ended up being longer.
Yeah, exactly. But it was definitely
a shorter track.
To answer your question, because that was the idea. It was like Inheritance Part 2 would be like the Close to the Edge, and then Memoriam would be like the ballad, and then Ritual is kind of, it's a lot more rhythmic and kind of groovy, I call it. And then like the Premonition and Weightless were supposed to be kind of just like an intro and an outro, but then those songs became a lot more realized. And actually it's funny because Weightless, I had given Raph like, oh, okay, here's like a cool riff. And then I thought like, we'll just do some melodies and that's it. And then Raph wrote the whole epic middle part. And then it was kind of like, we didn't spend that much time on it. It was sort of like, oh, here's the middle part that's really heavy. And then we'll have the outro. I was like, okay. And then as we were working on the album, we were like, wow, this is maybe like our favorite song, because it came together so naturally, where other songs were sort of like, it's such a grind to try to get it right. And that song just kind of, the vibe was already there. So you're always going to be surprised.
I think it's the difference between like writing a song like it's a Sudoku, where you have like a bunch of numbers in there and you have to make sure all the numbers add up, compared with like having just one thing and then just sort of building around the first idea and letting it develop in its own way, which with those bookend pieces was essentially how they came about, right? Yeah, so in terms of composing, I guess okay. I just want to make sure I answer the question properly. But in terms of the process, it was like the same process for writing, the same style for writing as Woodfall. But where, it's like you had written the guitar parts and like the bulk of them, most of them at least. And then the songs were sort of like structured. And then I basically got the guitar MIDI and then wrote the cello and violin on piano to go with it, and then had like a score. And then, but I think one of the things that was different this time is that we questioned a little bit more sort of the integrity of each song, and okay, is it exactly what we want to have, or are we willing to depart from it a little bit? Like we allowed ourselves more time to refine and edit what we had done. So obviously we already had the idea of the form in place, that we would have more of a mix of longer and shorter songs, but also we reworked some things in the arrangements as a trio, where we thought, okay, maybe this would sound better if we did that, or let's just change these notes here. Pretty small things for the most part, and yeah, the track Premonition was written all together in the same room, which is different from what we had done on previous records. So it was very organic. We had to do like a grant application, to get funding for the record. So we had like an afternoon and we had a couple of initial ideas and then just sort of jammed it out and then recorded it the same day, actually. And that became the initial sketch. There were a few changes going into the recorded version, and then more changes sort of in post-production, like in mixing, where we tweaked it even a little bit more. I think that it's always tricky with those intro tracks to get them to flow properly, like to get the beginning of an album to feel right, especially when it's so gradual and it sort of introduces everyone slowly and sets the tone for the rest. And it had to feel like something that would be engaging, but also a bit mysterious. Like, you're not being told what's happening. It's sort of like a movie where you have this kind of scene that you're not, because of the way it's filmed, the angle at which it's shot, you don't see the entire picture, or you don't know all the things that happened before. And maybe the entire movie is leading up to this scene, and then the rest of the movie is, following that. It's kind of got that feeling to it where it's sort of, coming in the middle of something, like you're just witnessing these events, and that you don't know the entire backstory yet, and then you get filled in along the way. So I think that's more or less how it went. And I mean, there are things that I do sometimes where I'll change the guitar a little bit if I think that it would benefit the entire group dynamic, because it's difficult to write, an entire sort of song structure on one instrument and then expect that the entire thing will flow together. And you have to kind of go back and tweak. And there was a fair bit of that, I think, that happened this time that we didn't do last time. And I think that it made it a better record because we were a little bit more critical, not intensely critical, but we were just kind of improving more details. And we had the experience of knowing what was difficult to pull off last time. So
Yeah, and there was also we also kind of jammed on some things and then changed arrangements from that, which was neat. Like I think in part 2, like there's certain things where I think even like all of us chugging at the same time, I feel like we just came up with that together. Like yeah, or like just certain things we were like, or when we we left out the downbeat, just things that you'll never like. That's one thing that I love about like playing music with other people. It's that it doesn't matter how long you spend by yourself composing. Like when you bring other people into the mix and you're with your instruments, you'll hear something like, oh, that would sound really cool. Like, oh yeah, let's try that. Let's do this together instead of, or like, oh, I'm going to cut out. And so I think that, yeah, this album was a really good learning experience. And I think it has us really excited for the next album because we learned so much doing this that it's like, oh yeah, okay, we need to like write more music together and like really take our time with it. Because I think like Raph was talking about the first song, originally it was like guitar riff, a few times, then like everything was very like square. It was like this riff, then this riff, then this riff, and like once, and we thought that song would be the easiest to record. We're like, oh, it's simple compared to the other things. And then once we recorded it, we were mixing it, we were like, this sounds off. And then it was like, okay, well, let's take Raph's ambient strings that are supposed to be in the background, let's copy those a bunch of times, put them at the beginning, and then like bring Evan in, and then I like cut out a bunch of my guitar, and then it took a while to get that right, but that's a thing that probably had we worked on it a little bit more, or even maybe, I think some of the songs we had played live, I think we did. I don't think we did any before we recorded. I think because we had done part 2.
We did actually. We played all of them except Weightless, I think. Yeah, we did.
Right. At the 10-year anniversary show.
Yeah, we did 2 songs at that show. So we actually played all of them except Weightless. And then we still haven't played Weightless in a live setting. Only for the music.
Yeah, but we've never played Premonition live, I don't think.
Have we? Oh, maybe we haven't, except on the recording. Yeah, we made a demo recording. Yeah. So yeah, actually we never played that one in a live setting. But certain things like that were very much just sort of the pattern on the last record. We challenged that a little bit. Like, yeah, obviously starting the first song with no guitar, whereas like all the songs in Woodfall started with guitar first. Or was, for example, like I was using an alternate tuning on Weightless. That's like a different thing. And I think just generally trying to challenge the idea of like everything playing all at once, or having everyone playing a lot of parts all at once, and thinking about tempo too. Like, should the tempo be actually this fast, or is it going to breathe better and groove better if we play it at a slower speed, and how do we make it maybe sound faster without being faster? That's something like with acoustic instruments, it's really important. You can only play so fast before it kind of turns into mush, and where you don't really feel any topography in the music, where it's kind of like, it becomes quite flat. I think that goes for any type of music, but particularly with this combination, like being able to play into the dynamics more and to emphasize parts of the groove and, to play with feel, all those types of things to kind of create a sense of depth in the music is super important, especially playing for these long stretches with a fixed instrumentation. And I think that's one of the big takeaways from this record that we wanted to try to apply more is, okay, how can we have more breadth in the music, and how can we maybe, instead of trying to come up with one complicated idea and then add 2 other complicated ideas or something like that to it, like maybe have one cool idea and then share it between the 3 instruments so that they become like one instrument. I think we started doing that a little bit here, but I think that's something we have a lot of room to explore in the future. And that's something I'm kind of stoked about.
If you are enjoying this interview, please head over to theprogspace.com for more reviews, articles, pictures and interviews, all about progressive music. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. theprogspace.com. Yeah, so but I want to go a bit back then, because Musk Ox have been around for quite a few years. You know, the debut album was released in 2007, if I'm not wrong, and that was just you, Nathanael. And then in 2014, of course, Woodfall, that we have discussed quite a bit now. You guys have told me about. That's when Evan, which is the violinist, and you, Raphael, came in. Can you tell me a little bit about the start of the project? And how Musk Ox came to be?
Sure. Basically, I moved to Ottawa in 2005, and I had just decided to leave university to, I don't know, to just play music. I wanted to take music more seriously. And so I decided to move here and start taking guitar lessons. So I had met a professor at the university that I had been at, and we started doing classical guitar lessons. And so, in like 2006, I just started recording. Around 2005, 2006, I started recording some acoustic ideas, and I couldn't play guitar that well. So I would record a simple idea and just add a lot of things to it. And and then after a few years, after a year or two, I guess in 2006, I did that first demo, which at that point, I didn't know it was Musk Ox yet. It was just an acoustic demo. And then I did another one in the winter of 2007, and then another one in 2008. And so basically after those first two demos, I decided I wanted to go to properly record them at a real studio instead of just in my bedroom. And so I ended up meeting Dean Watson, who he's engineered and worked on all the Musk Ox albums. So I met him one night, and he said, "Oh, I have a studio," and it was really close to my house. So I went there in 2007, and I was like, okay, I told him, like, I'm a heavy metal fan, but I'm doing an acoustic album with nature sounds. And he said, okay. And then we were talking about metal, and he said, "Oh, I'm working with this kid, Raph, who's doing metal stuff, and he likes some of the similar bands." And so this was 2007. And so I thought, okay, that's cool. And then I recorded the album that summer, and then I released it. I guess it was more of an unofficial release in like fall 2007, where I just printed some CDRs and just mailed them to some review sites. And so, so that was kind of the beginning of it. I took those demos and I sort of properly recorded them. And it was when I was in the studio that I thought, okay, I like this name Musk Ox. Like it was a name that I don't know. I had a picture of a Musk Ox that's on the original album that a friend of mine drew, and I brought it to the studio for inspiration. And then I thought, oh yeah, like I like this because it represents the natural world. It's also ancient, and it's also Canadian. I mean, they're not exclusively Canadian, but it represents kind of it's natural, it's ancient, and it's Canadian, which I thought all those elements were really cool. And so. Yeah, so then it was in 2009 that I actually contacted Raph because I had done some Musk Ox shows with different musicians, and then eventually they decided to go do other things. And so I reached out to Raph, and he came over, and I had these songs, and we just connected immediately. And Raph was super young then. He was like a teenager. I think he was just out of high school. Yeah. And And I think high school, Raph was a bit of the black sheep because Raph was like doing death metal drums and cello and guitar. Like Raph is so creative. I think people who were like, "Oh, we're going to play music because it's cool." Raph was like, "I'm going to play music because I have to." And like people didn't understand him, like it's like death metal because it's like death metal guy, but like drums, but cello and piano and everything, and classical guitar and flamenco guitar. And so when I met him, it was like, we're like, "Oh yeah, Opeth." We just talked about all the bands that we liked. And then it just immediately clicked, and I think we played a show like a week later or something. Like, And so Raph, like, even though Raph didn't appear on a recording until 2014, like he actually joined like very, very early on. And so from 2009, we started doing shows, and then I had like one piece left over from the older lineup that I really liked, and then we started and I had these ideas, and then we started like building on Woodfall for a couple years. And then Evan joined like as we were recording that. But yeah, I basically just started in my bedroom, just doing some acoustic demos, all inspired by, the early Ulver albums, Imperium, Tenhi, all of that scene, which I thought was neofolk, but actually isn't really neofolk. It's kind of another thing, but all of that, and Nest from Finland, like all these acoustic projects, and like the acoustic part of Opeth, like that was the original inspiration. I thought, I really love all the acoustic interludes on metal albums, but I want to do a full album of that music. Like In Flames would do it, or like Dark Tranquillity and Opeth. So that's kind of where it came from. And then obviously Agalloch were a big influence. So it was kind of like that heavy metal style acoustic playing. And then when Raph joined, then we started getting really into like a lot of the instrumental prog metal that was coming out in the 2010s, like Scale the Summit and Animals as Leaders. And so it was kind of like prog metal meets like classical meets nature folk kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, we were kind of in this. Well, for me, what was interesting is that before joining Musk Ox, I'd never heard about neofolk before. I was a big metal fan, a big prog fan, but I didn't really know what neofolk was. And then we were just like playing, and then we listened to stuff like we would listen to like I think like Valley and like a bunch of bands and stuff like that. And I was like, I never heard that music before. So then I realized, okay, there's this whole scene here. So I was discovering that, and then at the same time, getting into a lot of these new instrumental prog bands. So it was an interesting period. And when we were working on Woodfall, I think we were both in this kind of like phase where we were interested in complexity, which I don't resonate with as much now. But then I was just like, not only because of those bands, but also because then that whole year, I guess it was the year before we really started like working on getting that whole record written. I was, in my first year of university, and I was like just grinding on cello, just working on my chops. So for me, it was like anything I could play that was challenging was exciting. It was like, I want to play something that's not anybody could play. And, I wanted that to be part of the music. And when we did the first few songs, it was like more spacious, and I had to think more about like how to improvise and how to kind of shape and stuff. And then I was like hungry to play something really difficult. And then that's exactly what we had with Woodfall. It was like really difficult music, nonstop. But yeah, so like that first track that sort of came from the old lineup that had been worked on ended up being Earthrise, which is the first track on Woodfall. And that song we played like all throughout 2009, 2010. And we played it a lot, and it underwent many iterations. I remember, the parts changed up so many times, and then we kind of finally arrived at the version that's on the record. And we had a violinist playing with us for a year, and then she moved to India, and then Evan was already playing in the Night Watch. So, and then you guys had the Butternuts before that. You had another band even before that. So it was very obvious, like, oh, Evan will play violin in the band. And that was like, I guess late 2010, probably. I think we had our first jam with him.
Maybe, yeah.
I think it was as early as that, but then we didn't end up doing shows, all three of us together, until a little later. But that's kind of, I guess what you might call the earlier days. We were very active live then, though. I remember like the first couple of years, we played a lot of shows.
We do like house shows and stuff. Like
we played a lot of small.
Where it was just me and Raph for a while as well, and we had an earlier violinist like Raph mentioned, but we also did a lot. Like we used to play songs from Woodfall when we were writing it, just the two of us. Play them at like breakneck speeds.
They were so fast back then. We played them way too fast, but it was kind of good to work on them in a live setting and get a sense of how they felt, and really because we didn't have that sense of like workshopping and doing pre-production then the way like most bands would just do that now, and the way we think about doing it now. We just said, oh, we have this show offer, let's go play. Oh yeah, why don't we try this new piece and just work on it, that way. And that kind of got us in shape, I guess, and warmed us up for the recording.
Yeah, the whole thing has always been, Musk Ox has always been a weird project, because I never like, when I started, it was like, oh, I'm playing guitar and I'm recording these things. And I used to put the microphone outside my window and record crickets. And I just ended up with these. I never thought like, I want to make this kind of music. That's kind of what happened. Like when I would play classical guitar, I would just picture nature. And then, and it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to start a project like this. It was like, oh, I made this demo. Okay, now I'm going to make this album. And then it's always unfolded. And then, oh, now there's Raph. Now it went from like very minimal, peaceful pieces to like like a 60-minute song with like all these weird time signatures. And it's always kind of unfolded. And I think that's been kind of interesting with this project, because I think we have that freedom, to just let it sort of evolve in its own way.
I think it's what naturally happens. But sorry, I was just going to add.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that we're all old enough that we remember what it was like before. You had to be big. You had to make a statement right away. You had to present yourself professionally and look good all the time and like look like you're killing it. And like we started this before that was really a thing. And, I think in the zeros, there was like just more space and more time. Like bands didn't necessarily have to have all that dialed in the same way. It was more just about working on music, I think, like just music. And, we didn't really have, like, social media wasn't really a thing yet in the same way. Like, obviously we connected through MySpace, I didn't even have Facebook then. And then I remember when MySpace kind of went under and Facebook became the main platform, I just thought, oh, where's the music? Like, how do I where's the music player? Why do I have to navigate off Facebook? It's like, oh, where can I listen? There's no music here. Like, I want to just listen to this band, but I can't. I have to like find them somewhere else, I guess. And so there's been a big shift, but I think that we've had that freedom in a way because we're old enough to have come from a period where things were less saturated and there was less pressure on bands to like get it together. Come on, you gotta look the part, and you gotta be producing content all the time, and you have to like make albums properly all the time, and you have to know what you're doing, and send a certain message. Like, there's a lot of pressure, so it's harder to just like kind of get into a zone where you're really able to reflect on the music and kind of give it a lot of thought and let it sort of mature at its own pace. It's much harder now, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. And also the focus, all of those things you're talking about, the focus is on the image, the visuals, the things that are really existing outside of the art and the music itself. So for, artists, creatives, just like you yourself, I'm sure, taking promo images wasn't what made you become musicians. So in that way, I can understand that is not something that you don't want to spend most of your time, doing social media stuff, right?
I mean, when you end up in that place, it's like, wait, this isn't what I signed up for. It's like, if you get to this point where it's like you're spending more time on that, then you're like, I think I'm wasting my own potential, like what I'm supposed to be spending my life doing. If you spend too much time there, like at the same time, it's very important now. And I think there's so many ways of making it creative too, but there is this kind of tipping point where it's like, well, yeah, but if I'm not spending as much time making and working on the craft, then it's like, it feels like a bit of a waste of life. Like, what am I doing with my life all of a sudden, when it gets to that stage?
Because even when I did the first Musk Ox EP, that was in summer 2006, and like it was my first summer in a new city, and I was working at a kitchen, and then one day they were like, "Oh, like it's not busy, so we're letting you go for the summer." And I had saved a bit of money, so I just was like, "Okay, well, I'm just gonna not work for the summer." And again, back then you'd go on the internet for a little bit, you chat with somebody on Messenger, MSN Messenger, like ICQ or something. Yeah. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to go like for a walk and like, play guitar by the river, but I didn't have a phone. So I'd bring my Discman, and like, it was just a different mentality. I think you were more like, people were more like this than like this. And it's not to say that it's easy to romanticize it, but it's also important to remember that, like, back then I wouldn't wake up in the morning, go on the internet and see an artist who has way more fans than me and then feel like, oh, why am I even doing this? Like, I'll never be that popular. And then like feel bad about myself. It was just like, oh, okay, like I'm going to go play guitar under a tree for the afternoon and like read a book, listen to a CD. And like that, like I wasn't concerned with other people so much, I think it's easier to it takes more effort nowadays to get to that place. That place still exists, but you have to like be very, very mindful in how you engage. Yeah, exactly. Because it's like, even just one thing, it's like a trap door. You're like, I'm going to go here. And then you're like, you fall. And then you're in some, like, even like, I've been thinking about like, I wake up in the morning, I'm like, I'm going to check the weather. And it's just like, oh, there's been like 50 tornadoes and like 100, like people are dying everywhere. And it's like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to go enjoy the sunshine now. Like,
it's like TMI, you know what I mean?
It's hard, you know, especially with, so, but the thing is, like, what I find is every time when you're able to kind of like close the door and just sit with your instrument for an extended amount of time, like, then you can kind of like, you know, but and I think it was easier to do that back then. And also there was more mystery, like even with the acoustic music that I was listening to, like Tenhi and these bands, I was like, I didn't know, you know, it's like I'd get a CD, but there was more mystery. I didn't know who these people were. Like, so it was kind of like this mysterious discovery, you know?
Yeah. There's a certain magic in that, I think, not knowing everything about them.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think it's important what you said, Nathan, about, you know, not, you know, you can state that that's the way it was. And then, you know, it's easy to romanticize it. But at the same time, you know, we have to be mindful of the musicians that are like coming up today. They are working within this realm and they're still producing amazing music. So, you know, I think there are opportunities anywhere, even if maybe sometimes we who are older and even older like me, you know, really, you know, miss those days where, you know, you listen to an album until it was sort of dead in the CD player or on the record player. And
exactly. No, and and I mean, even being like doing a Zoom interview with somebody across the world, like, you know, or even like, I think, there's so many new opportunities, you know, to share your music now. So it's just being able to find the balance of like using the technology in a healthy way, but also taking time for yourself to like, you know, even like finishing an album, it's like, you're like, oh, I did this thing, but then, it's so easy to compare yourself with other people and sort of like get distracted from the moment of like, wow, okay, like this is done and we did this. And like, I need to take a moment to even just celebrate this. And like, you know, and so again, but it's the discipline and it's also just being able to know yourself and what things for you are, you know, make you feel bad or when, you know, when to go on, you know, it's just that balance, when to go for a walk, when to actually engage online. And
it is different, you know, being able to talk with some of my favorite musicians, you know, through a Zoom interview like this, than, you know, when I started out sending out, you know, an interview by mail for my fanzine, hoping that I would have it back in 3 months in time to print the thing or something. That's quite different. But I want to touch on something you said earlier about, you know, your love of this, you know, acoustic or this music you're playing coming from, you know, some of those metal bands and I'm the same way, you know, I'm like an old death metal and black metal guy, and I love those like acoustic interludes or little piano parts or whatever bands often would have. So when I discovered Musk Ox, I was like, wow, this is like that, just a whole album of it. And you talked about neo-folk and how your music is not quite neo-folk. You describe yourself as a chamber folk trio, isn't that right?
Yeah.
I think I was actually doing an interview a couple of days ago about the new record, and what we did touch on at one point is this what we call ourselves, and I think we've been very much associated with folk, you know, in some respect. And I think that I don't think we really are folk at all, actually, but we are just kind of tied to it in terms of the scene that we're part of somehow and the associations we have. And I think maybe that's the main reason we've kept it, is because it kind of makes us more part of a community. Because one of the things that I mentioned was that someone who plays classical music full time, which is not me, would look at our music and say, that's not classical music. You know, and one of the big reasons is it has like repeating structures in it. It has riffs in it. It has the language is totally different. Well, not totally, but quite different. And I think a lot of
notably different. Yeah,
a lot of classical musicians really look down upon minimalism or the idea of repetition and the idea of things being too obviously rhythmic. I think with a lot of like, sometimes people would call those pop rhythms what we're playing, even though I think that they're you know, way more complicated than pop in a lot of cases. Or
of course,
you know, but but that's kind of how it might be regarded. So we're kind of neither one nor the other, but definitely we're chamber music. I mean, it's the definition of chamber music, what we do. So
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think to add to that, I think when it comes to genres of music, I think there's different levels, different ways of looking at it. I think the most basic way of looking at it is, oh, well, it sounds like this, so it's this. But I look at genres and styles more from like an essence or like a spirit, right? So for me, especially when you talk about something like prog, to me, prog isn't, complicated time signatures and long songs, like prog is a spirit, right? Like every genre of music starts as a spirit of expression, so even like I think Roy Stolt from the Flower Kings, who's one of my favorite guitarists, he said, there was no prog in the 70s. It was just good music. Like we were just trying to make good music, right? And for me, the essence of that scene in the 70s was doing something that hasn't been done yet, right? They were like, like we haven't heard a 20-minute song, okay, in like rock music. Let's do that, or like let's do a keyboard solo. Like these were all new things, right? And then eventually, like any scene, once it happens for a while, then it gets a name, then it gets the kind of box around it, and
it does.
So for me, it's the spirit, right? So to me, and I think the chord progressions as well that we play are rooted in folk music. Like they're kind of more standard kind of folk progressions, but we're playing them in complicated ways with heavy classical type instrumentation, But so I think for us, it's about channeling the spirit of those genres, right? The spirit of prog or the spirit of black metal or folk music. Like it's a feeling that more than like, because people will hear it, they're like, I hear cello and a violin, so it's classical music. But then Raph will say, well, classical musicians will say this isn't classical, or then someone will say this isn't folk, or like, and to me, that makes me very happy. And it makes me very happy that we're creating music in a scene that doesn't really have a name yet. Like I think when I started, I thought it was neo-folk, but I remember getting this compilation called Looking for Europe, and it was all about neo-folk, and all the bands that I liked on that album. In the booklet, it was like a book like this thick. In the booklet, it just said, oh yeah, this band actually isn't neo-folk. Like Neun Welten, this band isn't neo-folk, or In Gowan Ring, or Tenhi. Yeah. And I was like, well, these are all the bands that I like, so what are they? And so to me, it's exciting because, and one of the things I think sometimes I'm like, I hope that this style of music doesn't get a catchy name like gent or, because once it does, then it's going to be like, oh, you're this. And then people can copy that. It's like cello, a classic core or something like.
Well, don't worry, it will happen because that's sort of what happens with any genre, right?
Yeah.
That it gets sort of solidified after a while, and then you have the bands that are more wanting to emulate than to create something new. But that's okay too, because some really, really good albums have come out of bands that are really wanting to sound like another band, and suddenly they do an even better job of it. It happens. So I don't think that's a problem. But you mentioned that, neo-folk, and you mentioned your own, the chamber folk label. But at the same time, of course, there's a lot of progressive elements in your music. And you guys have been, very warmly received, I feel, in the progressive rock and metal scene. So how do you sort of view the progressive elements of Musk Ox?
I think we use that language in the music, but the instrumentation is classical acoustic instruments basically. So I think that the vocabulary, the types of ideas, the phrases, the rhythmic content, all that stuff is very closely linked to I would say progressive metal. I think that's kind of, it's very, very similar in a lot of ways. So you could easily translate that to electric instruments. We'd even talked about it at one point with Woodfall, that some of this stuff, it could just be played with electric band as opposed to an acoustic one.
Yeah, I see.
Or and we'll cover it ourselves.
Yeah, that was
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Forget that I said that. We have to keep it a secret now. But
I'd rather somebody else do it. Like make that effort to transcribe it and learn it.
Well, I was going to say having to make that record again. You know what I mean? Yeah, but then with, for example, the track Hindsight, you know, that piece goes into a really heavy territory with still only acoustic instruments, and we're not adding any distortion. It's just the way we're playing and the way the arrangements are set up that gives it this density, and you know, the rhythmic designs that are happening kind of put it in that mode, I guess. So really, yeah, I think that it's the language we're using. You know, when I was younger, I remember I didn't really care about. It was kind of funny. I was like not mature enough to really understand the importance of timbre, but I was really just completely focused on vocabulary and notes and like the types of notes and rhythms that were being used. If I could get that just right, then it didn't matter. Like the rest of it didn't matter. I was just getting my idea across. And now more and more I'm focused on timbre and frequency and like the sound quality, and the way something is played, as opposed to just the material, what's in the ink, so to speak, on the page. But I think kind of striking this balance where you can negotiate the two is really useful. But certainly, like if you disregarded the timbre of our music, then it's metal, I think.
Yeah, and
I think for someone like me who's not a musician, you know, there's definitely a heaviness and I don't know, like there's at times there's like a cacophony of you know, the sound is like increasing to a cacophony that I only find really in, you know, some classic music maybe, but in metal in general. So there is definitely like a noticeable heritage there, even for someone who's not a musician like me.
Yeah. If I want to add to that too, because you know, Raph was talking about prog in the arrangements, you know, and in how the music's written, and like to kind of double back to what I was saying earlier about the spirit. Like when I did the first Musk Ox record, you know, the first EPs are very similar to, you know, the early Ulver or like the Imperium albums or the acoustic Imperium albums where, you know, but what I realized listening to those albums was that I thought, I love these albums, but the songs are too short, you know? And so at the time this was mid 2000s, I was getting really into post rock. And I think that was kind of a golden era for post rock music. I was getting into Mogwai and Godspeed You Black Emperor and Sigur Rós. And I thought, you know, it'd be really neat if like there was like a post rock album, but that sounded like Imperium. You know, that was sort of like and to me, that's prog, because I hadn't heard that yet. Like to me, I think not just with Musk Ox, but with Raph's projects and with the Night Watch, like I like the records that we make because there aren't like, I don't want to sound arrogant because it's not an arrogant thing. It's the musician in me. I'm excited to create something that I haven't heard yet, you know, and sometimes that means you have to try something and you might not succeed. But, you know, to me, I thought, okay, like this Musk Ox record, I haven't heard a record like this yet. So I'm going to make that and see. It's an experiment, you know, and that experimentation to me is the essence of prog, right? It's like with Raph's album, The Visit. It's like, I've never heard a record like that, you know, and I'm sure when Raph was making it too, it's like, okay, you're doing progressive metal inspired by Middle Eastern music, cello riffs with a vocalist. It's like, that to me is exciting. And then with Woodfall, it was like, we took it even further. It's like, instead of just, I want to hear Imperium riffs, you know, that are a bit longer. Now it's like, I want to do Imperium meets Green Carnation, Light of Day, Day of Darkness. Exactly. You know, like, what is that going to be like, you know? And then with this one, it was like, mixing in other kind of elements as well. And so, to me, that is prog. It's like, here, I'm always trying to find this gaps in my record collection and see if I can fill them. You know,
I agree with you, and for me that is, you know, listening to Kveldsanger by Ulver. You know, I was like thinking, you know, I love this album, but I wish there was more.
Exactly.
And with that album, there's kind of, you know, it stops here. This was like an experiment of their 3 albums, you know, and this is it with this. So when I discovered Musk Ox, I was like, okay, this is sort of based in the same stuff, but it is more something that I wanted. So for me, that was very interesting. You know, we are moving towards the end of the interview, but I want to ask you guys, what does the future hold now for Musk Ox? Are you planning now that the pandemic hopefully is slowly winding down, are you hoping to bring your music out on the road and play live? Are you currently writing new stuff? What's in the cards here?
Well, we haven't convened all together very much since the record came out. We just had to sign everything together. That was the main thing. We had to sign a lot of records. But we've been talking about, performing live more. It's something that I think really with this album, like we've kind of set ourselves up well to do that. Finally, I feel like in the past, we weren't necessarily all on the same page in the same respect with what we were doing and what we had released and everything. But now I feel like the way we've created this record and the way it sounds is the best representation of us as a band and the sound that we have and just what we've put out in terms of like videos and visual material feels like the best representation of us. Finally, I feel like all those pieces are in place. And so it makes sense then to make some plans to do some shows, but we haven't really, actually done that practically, but we have the desire to do it. And we've had discussions about what it would be like touring, which we've never done. We've traveled a little bit, but we've never done actual tours.
Yeah.
And obviously, we have individual experience of touring, which informs the decisions we would make and how we would approach it. And I think, definitely, we were hoping to write another record a lot faster and turn it around a lot faster.
We're not going to have to wait another 7 years for a new album, I hope.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think. Yeah. Hopefully not. I think we also have done a lot of different projects in between those albums.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think also just working on music that's very old, it's hard to sometimes reconnect with that spirit. So it'd be really nice to kind of work on it and kind of have a more clear window of like work as we're creating the record instead of like something over here and something over there and something over here. And then we try to weave it all together. So I think that's the plan, just to get together. And also I'm excited to learn these songs or to relearn these songs to play them live because I know that
of course
it's going to change. Like I know we're going to play them live much different than we recorded them. And so I'm excited to see how we do that.
Yeah. And I think that the record sounding the way it does, like it's again, I think it's the best recorded representation of our music. And that's going to push us to woodshed it, to really work on that stuff. So we really do those songs justice. That's our end of it. And then of course we have to make sure that, the venues in which we play are conducive to those sounds as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I hope that the opportunity will present itself for you guys to play this music over here in Europe at one point as well, because I'd love to see you guys live. And thank you so much for being on the Progtalks with me, guys. Of course, you out there, you should listen to Inheritance, the new Musk Ox album. Follow the band and the guys because they have other stuff, solo album, amazing stuff from Raphael, the Night Watch that Nathanael and Evan does. You can find it all on social media. Links will be here in the description. And if you haven't listened to Inheritance yet, you should, because it's an amazing album. Listen to it on streaming services, or even better, buy a copy, Thank you so much, guys, for being on the Progtalks with me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hopefully we'll see you in not 7 years.
I hope so too. Thanks to all you guys listening and watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy this content. It helps us out a lot. Until next time, stay safe and keep spreading that prog love. The Progtalks, produced by the Prog Space. Main host, Rune Belsvik-Reinås. Produced by Rune Belsvik-Reinås, Vanessa and Matthias Kirsch. All graphics and animations by Vanessa Kirsch. Intro theme by Giuseppe Negri. Outro theme by Zach Munowitz. This was the Progtalks by the Prog Space. See you in a week.